When we think of demonic possession, we usually think of over-the-top horror tropes like little girls turning into malformed creatures that can perform supernatural deeds like levitate, telekinesis, and speak in demonic tongues and voices. Nefarious, a Christian horror thriller from Believe Entertainment, largely adopts a very different approach to demonic possession. Nefarious portrays demonic possession from a more realistic psychological standpoint. An individual suffering from life's mundane tragedies and tribulations may be tempted to engage in bad behaviors as a coping mechanism. When practiced repeatedly, these bad behaviors eventually lead to bad habits. These bad habits can quickly become a lifestyle of sin that isolates one from society, as well as from psychological and spiritual salvation. Although it was just a horror movie, we found its themes to be surprisingly relevant. It explores themes such as free will, virtue versus vice, and the banality of evil, not just within a biblical context, but also within a modern societal context. The following is our reaction after having seen this film. Hey, so today we're talking about the movie Nefarious. It's a horror psychological thriller movie that came out. What year did it come out?
Like last year sometime. Yeah, 2023.
Yeah, like apparently like is that movie like made by a studio that's affiliated with Blaze TV or what?
I have no idea.
Because it had like Glenn Beck in it.
Yeah, that surprised me at the end. I didn't look up the movie. I just saw like a trailer and I thought it was interesting to watch, but I didn't look at, you know, who was behind creating the movie and who backed it really.
Yeah, so I haven't looked into like who created the movie, as in like which studio made it, but I'm assuming it's probably like one of those conservative leaning media companies. They're
Hmm.
basically making like independent movies, and from what I've read, the makers of this film were they have like a Catholic background, and so they've made Christian movies in the past. And the
Hmm.
movie itself is adapted from a book.
Oh, okay. Oh yeah, it says off of a novel. Um, That being said, though, like I feel like it still doesn't change anything for me. Like even if it, and this is like just propaganda for like I don't know Christianity, I still find it like entertaining.
Yeah, it was
It
like
kept me engaged the entire time.
yeah, which is interesting because nowadays, if you want to entertain people with movies, you want to use like lots and lots of special effects, lots and lots of CGI, and all this fancy cinematography and all these stunts. But then with that movie, it's a little over an hour and a half, but it's not boring at all. The whole time you're just fixed onto the movie. It doesn't feel long at all.
Yeah, and like for like just before we started recording, I talked about like looking to the criticisms of the movie, and I don't share the same opinions. Like people said. Would say that it's preachy, it was long-winded and boring, and that it could have been like cut into a third of what it was, but I felt like it's short enough, like an hour, like Lord of the Rings is way longer. And an hour and 30 minutes for a movie isn't bad.
That's
And
a
it flew by pretty quick.
An hour 30 is pretty short these days. Most movies these days are like 2.5 hours or something.
Yeah. And like again, we were engaged enough to like I watched it with like another friend. He's like more spiritual in the sense that like he's very connected to like South American and like Native American practices, religious practices. So, and he really enjoyed it because it had him really thinking about like morality and redemption and sin and all that. And it wasn't like it wasn't the reason why we watched it. I just thought it was cool and like we just watched it on a whim. It was thought provoking. So I don't know if the loud critics are just maybe anti Christian. Like I don't know. if that kind of plays into like the harsh criticisms of the movie. Because
Yeah,
overwhelmingly, a lot of the audience liked it. And
yeah. I looked up like the Rotten Tomatoes. Was it like the
Mhm.
critics said it was like 33 something percent, but then the audience was like 90 something percent.
Yeah, it's like almost like fucking 99%, 96.
Yeah, it's basically the culture wars all over again. It's kind of like how like whenever like a woke movie comes out, the critics are like, "Oh, this is so amazing. It's 90%." But then you look at the audience and it's like 20%.
Yeah, like that one Netflix documentary about like underage kids or whatever. I never watched it.
Yeah.
Cuties or whatever.
Cuties,
But
yeah.
yeah. Even with the religious context, because it was heavy-handed in the sense of like, it was like explicitly talked about. But I guess for me, I think again, I don't go to church. I hardly go at all. And I feel like I'm more of like a like convenient or like functional Catholic, where it's just I don't know, it's a good way for me to gauge myself morally where I'm at and not really practicing. But no, just like the themes, for example, about redemption and how that ties into like free will. So the guy's like possessed, but he's aware of his actions too. So like one thing that I thought about after the movie is like, okay, so is there free will or is just going off of the movie, like is like possession maybe in the literal or metaphorical sense, like is that like the end all be all, Like if someone's had like extreme trauma or abuse and like they end up living wickedly, like is it their fault even though they're aware of their actions or is it because of what they've been through? I
Yeah,
don't know.
I remember reading a thread on Reddit about that movie, and one of the comments was talking about how they were an atheist, but they found the movie interesting anyways, because then the movie talks about the whole concept of free will. And their
Yeah.
conclusion was that God was basically messed up for allowing the angels to have free will, but then at the same time, they're not allowed to follow through with their free will. Otherwise, they get condemned.
Yeah, I think the demon mentioned that and like that was a really good point. It had me thinking like why have free will if we're like uh susceptible to corruption and all that like, you know? Seems kind of like a sick joke.
Yeah. I guess the issue is that free will comes from the fact that these are beings who have extreme intelligence and then like they're extremely wise and knowledgeable about so many things. They're not stupid animals. And so you would think that they would know better. And so there's a much higher expectation for them to choose wisely. Because like not to get into like the weeds about the like, theology, but the idea is basically if you're like an angel, then
Hmm.
you're supposed to be damn near perfect. You're basically like the hands of God. You're supposed to do what God says. You're like a hand obeying the brain. And so the fact that
Mm.
they're able to use their free will and resist God, it's much more extreme than a human being resisting God. Because a human being, you could always say, oh, well, they're imperfect. They're flawed. They're animals. They're following their evolutionary instincts. They have their insecurities and they have their physical material needs. They're greedy creatures. You could say that. You could attribute human shortcomings to that. But with angels, they don't have that problem. And
All
so it's like,
right.
why would they willfully choose to go against God if they know better?
Right. It has to be something more extreme, like you said, then, or more intentional. Huh. Yeah, because I was thinking about that for hours, but that kind of explains it. Um, like how would you apply that concept to like a more like secular, I guess, example of human morality? That makes sense. Like how
Um, I guess it, I guess it kind of depends on where you think morality comes from. Because it seems like humans do have some innate capacity to have moral judgment. So in a sense, morality is kind of biological, wired into our DNA, but it's not clearly defined. We don't really know why we feel the way we do. We just know that we feel it when we see it.
Yeah. Kind of like I don't know. I don't know if this relates to it, but I saw like a bunch of inmates and there was some program where like if they were on good behavior, they could adopt a kitten or something. And like I feel like that's a good example of that. Or like when you see adults, like super like hyper masculine dudes, and then you see a kid just like walk through and everyone just like eases up on their tension. Because I don't know, maybe seeing a kid like is like an example of innocence. I feel like a lot of people can kind of relate to that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a yeah, another thing about the movie was like, what'd you think about the psychologist? I think he was a psychologist. Um, how he's like super secular and like very rational by the book. And towards the end, he kind of had an encounter where he can't really explain what happened throughout the movie or to him with logic, I guess. Uh,
I believe he's like a psychiatrist, but then in the movie, he's basically doing what a psychologist does.
yeah, that's what confused me.
Yeah,
Like,
there's a lot of confusion in there.
hmm,
But anyways, it kind of gets down to the point where the problem with a lot of atheist rationalists is they think that rationality is something you can just boil down to like one singular thing. But that's not really the case. Oftentimes it's a matter of perspective. And that's kind of what the devil did. Not the devil, the demon, Nefarious. That's what he did. Like when he was talking about how, like, depending on how you frame it, you could come to the conclusion that what that doctor did with his mother, where he chose to euthanize his mother, that's a form of murder. Where the doctor tried to rationalize to himself that, oh, well, she was in terrible pain, so I did her a favor by putting her out of her misery. But then the demon pointed out that he stood to inherit millions of dollars from her.
mhm.
And plus, he was kind of tired of having to constantly visit her all the time and pretend to feel affectionate. And he
Right,
just rationalizes to himself why he should just euthanize her rather than let her live.
right,
Basically, the idea was like the demon was trying to point out it's easier to rationalize bad behavior than people think. Because there tends to be this belief among a lot of rationalists where they think that you can just rationalize your way through morality. And so you don't need religion. You can just rationally figure it out. But it's a lot easier to justify screwing people over if it benefits you.
right. Damn, that's a heavy topic right there.
I mean, like, for example, like if you look at war crimes, we act like it's horrible, but history is full of war crimes.
Yeah, like war is literally hell. And
Yeah, and just because like someone, a soldier commits a war crime doesn't mean like he's a complete monster. Because that same soldier will then come home to his kids and his kids love him.
right. Going back to the free will thing, that's kind of, or trying to tie back into it, that's kind of trippy in the sense that, um, yeah, like war crimes are a good example of how humans can rationalize atrocities because they, you know, probably rationalize that it's for the greater good. Wasn't there like a experiment or prison experiment about something like this?
Um, it wasn't so much about rationalizing, but more had to do with like obeying authorities.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I
Okay.
believe it was called the Milgram experiment. I'm not sure that's his name.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
of that.
because I learned about it in like freshman year ages ago. But
Hmm.
basically, the psychologist had a bunch of students electrocute someone based solely on like his authority as like a researcher, as a scientist wearing a lab coat. And he would
Hmm.
tell them to electrocute this person more and more and more if they struggle to perform some task. And what
Right.
he found was that people were initially hesitant, especially as the shocks got worse and worse and worse. But after a certain point, people just kind of become desensitized and they just press the button. Shock, shock, shock. And they don't really respond anymore.
Hmm.
Now, fortunately, like no one was actually getting shocked.
Yeah.
The researcher was just lying about it. He wanted to see if they would actually do it or not.
Huh. Damn. Okay.
But I guess the idea was like it's a lot easier to commit war crimes depending on the situation. It's a lot easier to rationalize doing something bad than people think.
Right. I mean, wouldn't you agree though that like life is full of that quote, indecent men in indecent positions? Like if it's I do believe that like people should respond for their wrongdoings. Like how do you draw the line between like someone in a position where they might have to do something that's against their values that they know is bad, but for whatever reason they might have to go through with it? How do you reconcile that?
Again, I
That's
guess it boils down to like how well you can rationalize. So I
yeah.
guess the smarter you are, the easier it is for you to rationalize. Because like if you take someone who's like really dumb, then their rationality for it might be stupid. But if you
Mm-hmm.
take someone who's really smart, they won't just rationalize that behavior. They'll rationalize like an entire famine. They'll rationalize an entire totalitarian ideology. I mean, you look at communism, for example, even like fascism.
Yeah. That what's the point of intelligence if that's part of the I don't know. Seems like a double-edged sword in a
Yeah,
lot of ways.
and I think that's why the whole issue of like free will is like, why would God give people free will if people aren't allowed to exercise it? I think free will is more dangerous when you're intelligent. Because if you
Yeah, I
give
could
a dog free will, there's not much they can do with their free will other than like eat lots of food and maybe bite something. But if you give a human being, like a really smart human being, tons of free will, you give them power, the ability to lead armies, control entire countries, you give them the ability to use science to do whatever they want, they can do some serious damage. And so it's
right,
important to have like some sort of system that punishes people for using free will wrong because the consequences are too high.
right. Yeah, and then trying to think about sociopathy because it seems like I don't know if it was explained in the movie if like the demon or like Edward, the person the demon's possessing, how he might have lived like a rough life that kind of just on a downward trajectory. He just ended up being the person he is now. Um, yeah, like I guess what I'm trying to work through is I guess like the more bad you do, like you become more conditioned, the more you do a certain thing, right? Like the
Yeah.
feedback loop.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like drug addiction. You know, you
Right,
start off with something small. It's like, hey, it's pretty good. Nothing bad happened. I can do a little more. And then there's like, hey, nothing bad happened. I can do a little more. And then eventually you get used to it. You get used to it. And then eventually it starts to escalate more and more and more. And you keep telling yourself you're not addicted. And then when you try not to do it, it's impossible.
right. Like yeah, because I'm trying to interpret the movie through like a more modern lens, like how I don't know the regular everyman can relate to the movie. Because there are moments where like I guess like the demon like either gives up control or like Edward fights back and like you'll see the human side of that person and
Yeah.
how he shows remorse and like how he'll say like oh it's not his fault. Like part of it is you there is if there is free will then there has to be accountability for one's actions, but at the same time, like how do you balance like oh well, I guess he answered it, like you can rationalize it, but like yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. But like I guess uh what I struggle with it from that movie is if you just seek forgiveness and really adopt a change of heart that you'll be saved. Like what stops someone from just like living a wicked life and then just having like a last ditch, last minute, I don't know, like, submission to God.
I guess it's
Like
because
that under was that?
the longer you've been engaging in some degenerate behavior, the harder it is to stop. Because
Yeah.
like it's easier to quit doing drugs if it's your first time. But if you've been doing it for 10 years, you're kind of fucked,
Yeah.
basically. That's why people keep relapsing. It's like they go to rehab and then they relapse again.
Mhm.
Because it's all they've known for the past 10 or 20 years. They don't know anything else. It's their default for anything. Each time they have like a physical pain, drugs. Every time they're feeling bad, drugs. Every time they're feeling bored, drugs. It's their solution for everything. It's their automatic response. And there's like a neurological basis for it too. Because the more you engage in a certain behavior, the more the neural pathways for that behavior get reinforced. And so eventually it's like rather than just seeing that behavior as a solution to one specific problem, instead
Right.
it becomes a solution to all sorts of problems. So like rather than having one road lead to Rome, instead there's like a 10 roads that lead to Rome.
Right.
Like it's way too easy for you to just default on that bad behavior over and over again. And so like if you've been living like a sinful life for that long, it's extremely hard to stop.
I see. Okay, that makes sense.
And that's what I found interesting about this movie because I liked the first half more than the second half. The first half was like, because like it's interesting from like a psychological and even neurological standpoint.
Okay.
Because it basically blurs the line between theology and psychology. It basically showed how like, because normally in most movies, when you see like a demon possessing someone, like it's a very visceral thing where like the demon just jumps into the person and then that person just
Yeah.
starts acting all wild and crazy. But in
Mm.
this movie, it's more realistic. It starts with like small habits, bad habits, like a bad response to something. And then you get used to those bad responses. And then you do it more. And then you do it more. And you make excuses for yourself. It's like, it's not a problem. I can deal with it. I can fix it later. But you keep doing it and doing it and doing it until eventually your life falls apart. And we
Yeah.
see this happening all the time with all the homeless drug addicts.
Yeah, I think it's that's that slippery slope of like things become normalized the longer you engage in it. And the concept of like straying or like just your trajectory in life. There's like a book about it's a self-improvement book about like it's called Outwitting or Outsmarting the Devil. The main concept, it's like I guess it's more of a business book, but talks about the concept of straying. And it's easy to I guess like do one bad thing, rationalize it, and then you just keep doing it and then become adjusted to what used to be bad or like morally I don't know, conflicting, and then you just get used to it, desensitized to it, and I guess that's how people end up doing crazy shit later down in the road.
Yeah. So like I find that movie what's helps it stand out is that it's kind of has like a Jordan Peterson effect where it draws a parallel between theological phenomenon with like actual scientific psychology and human behavior that you see today.
Yeah, that was very reminiscent. That's what I thought about too.
Yeah, and another thing that I find interesting is the way they portray the demon is what's different between the demon's evil versus Edward's degeneracy is like Edward deep down he knows he shouldn't do it, he wants to stop, but he doesn't know how to stop because he's been doing it for so long. Whereas the demon, on the other hand, it likes picking on people. It sees that Edward is easy to manipulate, and it enjoys watching him destroy his life. It's
Right.
not because like evil isn't content with being alone. It does because like the difference is evil does not want to be does not want to live on a remote island and do whatever it wants. It wants to drag other people down with it. It enjoys watching other people succumb to degeneracy. It wants other people to go down to their level. And it
Mhm.
wants to watch them crash and burn. And it finds it amusing. That's what makes like the demon evil. It's kind of
Yeah.
like the goes back to like Aristotle's virtues, where at the bottom you have like vicious people who engage in vice and they're completely unrepentant about it. And then you have like the people who are like incontinent. They know they shouldn't do it, but they can't help but do it and they want to stop. And that's Edward. And then above that, you have continent people, which are people who deep down they feel like degeneracy, but they manage to stop themselves from doing it. And then the best people are the virtuous people, or people who not only don't engage in degeneracy, but they enjoy being virtuous
Mhm.
and it's easy for them.
Mhm.
And this
I'm like
movie,
somewhere in the middle.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. What were you gonna say about the movie?
So that's basically what I found interesting about the movie. I like the first half better than the second half. The second half, I
Mhm.
guess it does get kind of preachy. Because then like
Yeah.
because then they also say oh well, Jesus was like the ultimate threat. It's like he was the ultimate threat to somehow stop the demons. But they don't explain how he stopped the demons.
Yeah. I wish they went into that.
Yeah, like
'Cause I feel like that was glossed over.
they did a better job showing the perspective of the demon than they're showing the perspective of God.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. But I was still engaged. I guess like while you're in watching the movie, I wasn't really thinking about all that. But now that you bring it up, yeah, I definitely noticed how it felt kind of rushed towards the end.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because
because
like the first half of the movie was perfect. The first half was
yeah,
perfect.
because towards the end with like the Glenn Beck thing, like it's just Glenn Beck showing up. I'm like, what the fuck is he doing here?
That kind of takes you out of it.
Yeah, that kind of took the
I mean
piss
like
out of it.
his acting was okay. It's just
Yeah.
he's Glenn Beck. You can't unsee
Yeah,
that.
he's too well known. I'm like, what is this? Is this something political or still a good movie though. I still like it. I'd watch it again. But no, just the whole monologue with the demon was like very captivating and like really creepy too. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because like I feel like anyone can relate to what the demon was talking about. Because like what I liked was um the psychologist or psychiatrist where he talked about free will, or he just like the part where he was just like, okay, like he's humoring the demon. He was like, well, like we have so much freedom now, we could do whatever we want, and people are living higher standards of living, and racism is at an all-time low. Women have a lot of um, like free will to do what they want. And what was shocking was like the demon like kind of like exclaimed that like that's like he was like that's my boy, like that's why I like you, whatever. And that was like disturbing to me. I'm like, what the fuck? Like, what does he mean by that?
Yeah, because then like the demon's perspective is he do- like he doesn't pull people in by being evil. He just pulls them in by like getting them to ask questions. It's like why would God allow you free will if you're not allowed to follow it? And it's a perfectly valid question. It's a
It
question
is.
everyone wonders. And it's
Yeah.
hard to come up with a reason why not, you know? Because then like in order to like fully understand God, you would have to see things from the perspective of God, but we're not God. All we know is that we have needs and we're not allowed to follow through with our needs, and we feel horrible. That's all we know.
Yeah, I guess the lack of like information and like our flawed nature is what I don't know, is like a source of contention. I'm sure people feel
Yeah,
like
because
we're limited with our scope of knowledge and like how we view the world.
yeah, like there's like the part where like he brought up the issue with abortion and how he connected it to like ancient child sacrifices, where you
Yeah.
take something that's really important, which is a child, and you sacrifice it so that you can get something that's more important to you than the life of a child. Well, that's what basically what abortion is, if you look at it from that perspective. You know, it's like you sacrifice your child so that you can pursue pleasure in something else, whether it's your career, whether it's your sex life, drugs, or whatever it is that you like. You are sacrificing a human life so that you could pursue something else. That's essentially what it is. We just don't like thinking of it as sacrifice.
Mm.
It's very Jordan Peterson in a way.
Yeah, definitely. Was there anything from the second half that you liked? Because I feel like the possession part of the, well, it's probably spoilers, but like shit, this movie's like free everywhere, so I don't know. I don't care. But yeah, like how the psychologist eventually got possessed, and like I guess like the main message, the way I interpret it is I guess the psychiatrist asked God for help, and like I guess that like saved him or whatever. I don't know how I felt about that, or like if that was like that wasn't really convincing to me.
Yeah, the last part
I
of the
got the
movie
message
felt
though.
the last part of the movie felt rushed.
Yeah, but I guess
Like,
that was like to drive the point home or whatever. So I'm
yeah,
not knocking it. It's just like kind of not so much like rolled my eyes, but I'm just like, okay, I get it.
yeah, because that's where like the movie starts to become like other movies,
Yeah,
where it just becomes like, oh no, demon got me.
yeah. No
Now
power.
what?
Yeah. Um, you ever watch Devil's Advocate with Keanu Reeves?
A long time ago, I don't remember anything from it.
Yeah. I just remember Al Pacino being like some crazy. Oh, I guess he's Satan in that movie, but he's just I don't know. Within the same vein of like enticing humans to, you know, question things and question God. I don't know.
Yeah,
I wasn't coming up with anything at that point.
yeah, but
Yeah, with
basically,
your background, like what with your background in psychology, like what stood out the most? Or maybe you did answer this already from the first half.
yeah, it was the part where the demon was explaining how like it possesses humans through their psychological tendencies, through bad habits, and then getting them to practice those bad habits so that that bad habit gets reinforced over and over again until it becomes an addiction. It becomes a
Right.
full-blown lifestyle, and they can't give up on that lifestyle without suffering a massive ego death that
Yeah,
would force them to be reborn into a Christian.
right. Because like even early on in the movie, the demon said like before he was answering any questions, he was like, "Oh, like invite me in." To when he was asked, telling that to the psychiatrist. So I was expecting like the end to be like something much more like symbolic with the possession, but it ended up being like a literal possession that
Yeah,
kind of tainted the whole first half of like of the mind fuck of like I don't know the dialogue. I was hoping it'd be like something much more symbolic, but it ended up being a literal
yeah,
possession.
yeah. I think that was the weak part of the movie. But other than that, like the first two thirds were good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I especially like the first third the best because you kind
Yeah.
of don't know what to expect from it, and the acting is outstanding.
Yeah, he's a I don't know, like I guess he's been in the Boondock Saints, the demon guy, but it's really good acting.
Yeah, so we have like less than a minute now.
Damn. But oh really?
Yeah.
I think that's good. I don't think I have anything else I'd bring up. Just because like I don't know, I was trying to like bring up like more religious like themes, but I know nothing about it.
Yeah. That's why you rewatch things or reread things over and over again. You pick up on small little details.
Yeah.